So you want to become a YouTuber, but you don't have the $3,000 budget for a fancy looking camera like this, and you think the $350 Canon Rebel camera that's on a Black Friday deal is just, it's not going to cut it for you. So in this video, we're going to break down some common mistakes, and we're going to show you how to take this $350 Black Friday steal and turn it into a cinematic beast for YouTube. Now I use the term beast very lightly there, but you can turn it into a cinematic camera for YouTube. And all we're doing is just adjusting a few things like the audio, because that was making my ears bleed. And get the most out of your camera by switching to a higher resolution, set your white balance, and your ISO. Camera positioning to look professional, background, just to improve the aesthetic, a little bit of foreground. And now your lighting. Let's start with a key light, fill light. Now just with those few steps, you're gonna go from looking like this, all the way up to looking like this. So if this type of video and creativity and filmmaking is something that you're into, follow this little guide down to the corner and consider subscribing. The first thing we're going to do is switch from the onboard mic to something like a condenser mic. Now this one up here, conveniently out of view, is a condenser mic. This is going to give you that deeper, richer sound, that like podcasty kind of sound to your video, or to your audio rather. You could also switch to something like a lav mic, so a little lapel mic that sticks on your shirt just here. That's going to be your best, cheapest option. I'll leave a link to a $20 lav mic that I use. Just plug that into a recorder, you're good to go. Or you could use a shotgun mic. So most vloggers tend to have something like the Rode video mic, which is a shotgun mic, and that would again sit up here. So when we talk about mic placement, you're gonna place it just up and out of view. Whereas a lav mic, you can just stick on the side of your shirt, no one's gonna really notice it. Now I will say that if you're gonna be using a condenser mic or something like a shotgun mic, don't talk directly into it. Talk over the top or across it so you don't get those plosives, which is those B's and those P's that just sound horrendous. All right, so now you're happy with your audio because I couldn't let you guys go through this video with that bad audio. And the next step is to get rid of this horrible resolution and change up the camera settings to make this look just anything but as bad as it does right now. So let's start with changing the resolution. Currently, we're filming in 720p at 60 frames per second. The 60 frames per second doesn't matter too much for this type of video, but the 720p, ladies and gentlemen, it's 2019. We don't need to be filming on 4K, but we do need to be filming in 1080p. So let's switch that up right now. So now we're shooting on 1080 at 24 frames per second. Now the next biggest thing we need to work on is the white balance, because right now you see how I'm orange, I've got this really warm feel to me. That's actually not the aesthetic of this room. If anything, it's a cooler room because of the blues. We talk about cooler and warmer, cooler being more blue, warmer being more yellow. So let's change the white balance right now. So now I'm no longer looking like the sun from Teletubbies, or if I was on the cooler scale, I'm no longer looking like a Smurf. I'm looking, you know, like my normal pale skin tones. Now to get your white balance, you just need to make sure that you're shooting something that's completely white, like a piece of paper, my table, something that's completely white, so that your camera knows what's white. It doesn't know that on its own, you have to tell it. So your ISO is the next thing we're gonna fix, and essentially it's how much artificial light your camera inputs onto the shot. So depending on how much light is in your scene, depends on how much light, additional light, you need to tell your camera to add. So right now we're pretty much on the max. So we're gonna drop this down to as low as we can to make it work for the video. So we're gonna drop that all the way down to 200. So now you notice that we're pretty much as dark as it can be in here. We need to change our shutter speed, bring that down, and also bring our aperture down as well to open up those rings. So I'm gonna change those immediately and then we'll talk to what they are. And now bring down the aperture to open up the lens and add some of that background blur. So let's backtrack a second and talk about ISO. So ISO, the more artificial light you add, so the higher the number you make it on the camera, the more grain it's also going to add, because it's essentially the processor in the camera trying to add more light. So be careful when you're trying to crank it up, be careful it will introduce more grain to your shot. So try and keep that as low as possible and bring in as much actual real light as you can to the shot. And for shutter speed, the general rule is that your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be at 50, or 48, but you can't, so you hit it at 50. And then if you're shooting at 120 frames per second, your shutter speed should be around 240. Which is actually going to be 250 in camera. Now moving on to aperture. Essentially what you're doing here is opening up how much light is allowed into the lens. Now the lower the number, so if you're shooting at a 3.5 aperture, which this lens is right now, It's going to mean that there's more light coming into the lens, but it also means there's a shorter depth of field, which means there's a shorter amount of distance from the lens that's going to be in focus. So be careful here. When you drop to a low aperture to add in more light, you're going to create a smaller depth of field, which means less of your shot's going to be in focus. So just something to be wary of. But it does give you a nice blurry background, as whereas before everything was in focus back here, now everything's a little bit more blurred out. Now if we could drop down even lower than 3.5, something like 2.8 or 2, this background would be super blurry. So now you've got your camera looking sharp, all those settings are good. Let's start to play around with the camera positioning before we get onto the lighting to really bring more out of your shot. So now how you hold your camera defines how your audience sees you. So right now we're about eye level. What I want to be doing is bringing the camera down a little bit and tilting up. It's a little bit of a psychology type thing, but if we bring it down, add it up, this is what it looks like. Now let's move on to the background, some things that need to be done back here. Like see how we've got some leading lines back here. We've got some level of symmetry between this pinning us in and this pinning us in just here. But we don't want these cables and we don't want the random water bottle up there. We want to change that up with something else that invokes more of a feeling and is more applicable to the video. So we're going to get some plant pots up there and get rid of this cable and other stuff that's up here and switch it with some camera type of gear. Now if you fancy it, let's add a little bit of foreground. Since I'm at a desk, why not? So we're going to bring the laptop in a little bit. We're going to bring a camera onto the table. You know, adds a bit of depth to the shot so that as a viewer you can see that you have something in front of the main subject and then also something behind the main subject. Now the final thing is to add more depth to and drama to this stuff, and then also to me as the main subject because I am lit horribly. Now right now we have a main light pointing directly at us. It's got no softbox, it's just an LED light pointing at us. It's not a good effect. So what we want to do is, rather than this camera being straight ahead, we need to bring it round to the right, pointing 45 degrees down at us and at 45 degrees from us. So let's reposition this bad boy. So normally I'd use the Aperture 120D, which with that price tag is not a beginner light. So we've got something like this, which is a $60 softbox from Amazon. And what's cool is not only do you just get one of them, you get a second one too. So let's use that as a fill light for a little bit of light on the side of me here and to fill up some light on the backdrop. So the whole goal of this light is to add a less of a dramatic effect to me as the subject. I mean, this isn't a James Bond scene right here. We don't need too much drama, but it fills in a little bit of light down here that this light fails to do. Whereas this light gives us the nice little drop shadow off the face here and it's more of an appealing look. This helps to make it less dramatic. And also, background lights up a bit more, doesn't it? Now for a final step, this all looks pretty good and everything, but we want to add a bit more color back here. We want to bring out these few things behind. So we can do that by adding a little bit of light. And this little gem is hidden behind me. So this is an RGB light for a digital photo. Now essentially it has so many different settings. It's a portable light. You can change the color and the intensity. So we're going to go with a blue light pointing up here to kind of illuminate the backdrop, illuminate some of these things. We're going to get a nice shine off of these flower pots, these tin pots, and it's going to help reflect onto the items up here. In addition, I've got myself a nice little RGB strip that goes around the outside, so let's plug that in, and look how much more color we have. Not only does it add more color to the shot, but it brings out these items, which is exactly what you want. So there we have it. You've taken this 350 Black Friday steal and turned it from this into this with, a little bit of extra money, but that's only like $120 maximum. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want more videos like this, please consider subscribing, again following this guy down into the corner. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, do what you gotta do, and I'll see you guys in the next one.